Sir, Sir, shall we start, sir?
Yes.
Good evening. Welcome to our Mysore Global Forum. Mysore Global Forum is a weekly international panel discussion jointly organized by the Department of International Relations and BRICS Institute, India, to motivate the students to enhance their knowledge and to understand about the global issues and global trends in international relations. In the Mysore Global Forum, we had many more discussions like Indian diplomacy towards Russia and Ukraine war, China's stand towards Russia and Ukraine war, and India's maritime strategy, and so on. And today we have an eating discussion on politics of Sri Lanka's economic crisis, internal and external dimensions. Today, we have an eminent scholar, Professor I.Keethaponcalan, to discuss on the politics of economic crisis in Sri Lanka, internal and external dimensions. Sir, it's a great to us to invite you or to listen you, and it's a great pleasure to me to welcome you our Mysore Global Forum. I hope our students will be enlightened, will be benefited by your thoughtful, thought-provoking discussion, sir. And we also have Dr.Binod, our co-organizer and director, BRICS Institute of India, and who is giving a constant support in organizing Mysore Global Forum. We have many more discussions on this platform, sir. And today it is a great moment because as we know, Sri Lanka, since Ramayana, Sri Lanka is a good friend and neighboring country of India. And today it is very sad to see that, Sri Lanka under a great crisis. It is sure, it did not happen in a overnight. There may be so many causes behind the great crisis. This economic crisis, it is a great crisis in the memory. So many, because of failure of the policies, maybe politics, maybe fate of the Sri Lanka, maybe too much of interference of the Chinese, many other external, powers, I think. This is how we want to know more about the Sri Lankan crisis and how Sri Lanka is facing and what are the way out of Sri Lanka to come out from this problem. Sir, with this, I will warmly welcome to you, sir, and I will leave the platform to Dr. Binod, our co-organizer, to continue the discussion. Dr. Binod, over to you, sir.
Yes. Thank you, Bharati, madam. Thank you so much for getting us such a qualified and kind of authority on Sri Lankan politics for last 2-3 decades. And for any of our students who wants to start from kind of 101 class, on Sri Lankan politics, I think we'll refer to Dr. I.Keethaponcalan writings very well. So we are very grateful, sir, that he wake up, so early and joined us in India. We really need him, and we appreciate we send our gratitude to him. Before we start the topic today, which you have chosen, ma'am, I would like one of my student, Pinal, to do a formal introduction of sir. We should know our speaker better before we give the platform to him. His background, because he is from Sri Lanka, he was topmost political scientist in Colombo. And why he decided to go to America, he will narrate in his speech. So Pinal, if you are ready, can you just go through the brief CV of sir? Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir.
The microphone, please. Microphone.
Thank you so much, sir. Good evening to one and all present here. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce our speaker today, Dr. I.Keethaponcalan, who is going to talk on the topic, Politics of Sri Lanka's Economic Crisis, Internal and External Dimensions. Dr. I.Keethaponcalan is a professor of conflict resolution at Salisbury University, Maryland. He was chair of the Conflict Analysis and Dispute Resolution Department from 2011 to 2018. Before joining Salisbury University in 2011, he was a professor of political science and public policy at the University of Colombo, Sri Lanka. Dr. Keethaponcalan has also served as researcher at several international institutions, including the United Nations Institute for Disarmament Research in Geneva and the United Nations University in Tokyo. He served as a consultant to Sri Lanka's projects of several international agencies. Sir has published widely on conflict and peace-related issues in Sri Lanka and South Asia. Some of his recent publications are Electoral Politics in Sri Lanka, Presidential Elections, Manipulation and Democracy, year 2022. Post-war Dilemmas of Sri Lanka, Democracy and Reconciliation, year 2019. Conflict Resolution and Introduction to Third-Party Intervention, year 2017. Sole Representatives in War and Peace, The Case of Sri Lanka's LTTE, 2021. Asian Peacebuilding Theory and Practice, 2019. Violence, Nonviolence and Ethnic Reconciliation in Post-War Sri Lanka, 2015. Dragon in the Teardrop, Regional Dynamics of Increasing Chinese Presence in Sri Lanka in the year 2015. The Indian Factor in the Peace Process and Conflict Resolution in Sri Lanka in the year 2011. Finally, I would say it's a great honor for me to welcome you, sir. We are very honored to have you, sir. So on behalf of our department and all of the one present here, I wholeheartedly welcome you. The platform is all yours, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pinal. Before we request Professor Keethaponcalan to start his prepared presentation for our students, I would like to add a few points, what we expect from our speaker today in 20-25 minutes. One of the major interesting point for all of us is that when there's a crisis in South Asia, where are these big powers who talks about, conference on democracy or stability or reconciliation or human rights? So, when there is a crisis in Greece, the whole world is rising for them and how to bail out the Greece in European small nations. Sri Lanka is, in terms of population, in terms of island, I know Sri Lanka is not a very huge, big country, but in South Asia, Sri Lanka is a very important country. In Indian Ocean, Sri Lanka is a very important country. And also in the cultural and Buddhist realm, Sri Lanka has been a very important country and giving important message to the world peace and stability. And also, Sri Lanka has been a very peaceful and stable country compared to other regions. Any country can go into crisis. Even India has been through 90s payment crisis, balance of payment crisis. It's all about not only just domestic management. It's all about how the IMF and World Bank is treating us, how the world trading kind of mechanism. Every day we are going for a free trade. So in all this globalized world, where our manpower, our goods and everything is going, moving towards the developed countries. And what is left for us? So we would like our speaker to give us a little over background. I know he is expertise on conflict resolution and reconciliation, which is a very dear topic for any Indian student in political science here, because we are also facing similar issues what Sri Lanka has been facing with different communities, minorities, how to coexist in a parliamentary and federal setup. So looking from America, how do you see exactly the issue of corruption, nepotism, and so-called the good governance? The Prime Minister Modi is very famous for bringing accountability and good governance in India. Is there any lesson from India which Sri Lankan politicians can, adopt and make Sri Lanka come back on the route, on the track and become a normal country, start exporting and, getting economy back to the house? So we'll have a Q&A session after your presentation, sir. But I really want you to take a holistic view of the issue and little more about what these big powers like World Bank or yesterday IMF report, that they're still negotiating, they're still discussing and negotiating. So when there's a fire and we need water, they're just talking about negotiations and putting the wall. So how do you define India as a player in global stability and democracy, and United States, China, Russia? I want you giving an objective, comparative view of if India is emerging as a big player in the South Asia, what India should do more to its neighbors like Nepal, Bangladesh, and South Asia. So, sir, the stage is yours, and please let us know what's happening in Sri Lanka and how India can help better. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you for your time once again.
All right. Thank you very much, Renuka, for that wonderful, very kind introduction. And I thought you were talking about somebody else. I didn't realize that I was publishing that much. Also, thank you for inviting me, Dr. Bharati, Dr.Binod Singh. It's a privilege to meet you guys and get involved with the Mysore Global Forum. I hope our association continues. I'm happy to help in any way possible. I enjoy working with students. So maybe in the future we can work more closely in terms of helping the next generation. So in terms of the presentation, I have a PowerPoint prepared. Let me go through the PowerPoint first, and then at the end of the PowerPoint, maybe I'll come back to Dr.Binod Singh's point about big power involvement and also India. Then we'll take it from there. I look forward to the Q&A session more than the presentation, because I do well in terms of answering questions rather than making a concrete presentation. So let me try. Is it okay, Bharati? Is it okay if I share my PowerPoint?
Yeah, sure, sir.
Yeah. Everyone is talking about Sri Lanka's crisis. Internationally, I see too many headlines, bad headlines about Sri Lanka. And I was writing a little bit about the crisis as well. So when I write, I had to first tell what the crisis is. And I was going through a tough time explaining the crisis, because there are too many parallel variables operating at the same time to produce this crisis. Some crises are easy to explain. For example, in 2018, Sri Lanka went through a period of crisis. That was easy to explain because the president was very powerful according to the constitution, fired a government that had parliamentary majority and tried to install a minority government. And people were on the street, the parties went to the courts, and the courts eventually resolved it, and the government that had parliamentary majority came back to power. So that was an easy crisis to explain, right? But this one is extremely difficult to explain. So what I have done is put all the factors that, in my view, produce the crisis in this slide. What is happening in Sri Lanka, the scarcity of essential goods like gasoline, diesel, kerosene, medicine, electricity, etc. Therefore, people are very angry. They are on the street agitating against the government. The presidential secretariat in Colombo is sieged and he is under pressure to resign. The prime minister's office was under siege and he resigned. The current prime minister, who was the opposition party, he was in the opposition last month when the crisis started, warned the country that the banking system could collapse. Then Sri Lanka could not repay its bills. Some of the major international finance organizations downgraded Sri Lanka from a stable economy to a default status, and some of the international actors compare Sri Lanka to Lebanon. So these are the different factors producing this unstable situation. So the question is, why is it happening? What is the basic, what are some of the basic causes that produced the crisis? In my view, there are four different factors that contributed to the crisis. The first one is the foreign reserve that declined seriously. If I believe the current Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe's statements he made last week, he said when he left the government in 2019, there were about 19 billion something dollars in the reserve. Right now they have like 1.5, something like that. So it's not enough. That deficit was produced by a combination of factors like the impact of COVID, the tourism sector completely collapsed, and then you have the Russian war. Russia is one of the major buyers. Ukraine also buyers of Sri Lanka's one of the primary exports, tea. Therefore, the dollar remittance was very low. That's one of the reasons why the foreign reserve went down. The government did not have the right plans. Then the number two, in my view, is the budget deficit. The government was spending more, sometimes unnecessarily. For example, the war ended in 2009, and the country expected the defense budget to go down after 2010, but that didn't happen. In fact, in 2013 and 2014, the defense budget went up. Could not explain. The government continued to spend more on the defense budget, even after the war ended in 2009. And then in 2019, the new president, Gotabaya Rajapaksa, also introduced tax cuts, huge tax cuts. VAT was reduced and the corporate tax was reduced. That also brought the government earnings down. Therefore, they had to print Sri Lankan money. That had an impact on the value of the dollar. Dollar used to be like 190 last year, like 180 maybe, and now it stands at 355, 360 in the normal market, maybe a little more outside. Then the government also had some of the serious problematic policy decisions. I can cite various examples, but one of the best example is the introduction of the 100% organic farming, and the government suddenly decided, from now on we will not use any chemicals. You have to use organic fertilizer for farming. And the people and the experts in Sri Lanka rightly pointed out that although it's a very good idea, it would not work in Sri Lanka because you don't have enough supply in the market, organic fertilizers, and the Sri Lanka traditionally rely on chemical fertilizers. So suddenly you cannot change it. And the experts, I believe some of the experts said maybe it should be done gradually, and the government was over enthusiastic. It said, no, we have to do it. And suddenly, there was a food crisis because the farmers did not have the resources to produce enough. And also, number four, borrowing too much because they are spending too much. And the borrowing came mainly from China. As Renuka rightly pointed out, I have worked for several international agencies as a consultant on Sri Lankan projects. And everyone points out when China gives money, most of them are loans. You have to pay back and also interest. But when you get assistance from other sources. For example, the Western countries, the bulk come as a donation. So that is the difference. And also Sri Lanka was building some of the unviable, I would say, unviable projects like the Hambantota port projects and the Mattala International Airport. They're not really working. They are not producing any revenues. So you take loans and you cannot pay back. So these factors, in my view, combined produced the crisis. So what are the significant consequences that suddenly created this crisis? Inflation, skyrocketing about more than 30%. Some people say, some scholars, especially from the US, point out the actual inflation could be like 70 to 75%, but the officially stands at like 30%. Normal inflation in Sri Lanka is about 5 to 6%. And there were lots of bans on various items on import. They started with luxury cars, then went into other areas. And in March 2022, they introduced bans on, they banned 367 what they call non-essential items. Some of them could be problematic in terms of definitions. For example, refrigerator, that's one, I believe one of the items banned. Is it essential or non-essential? So people were upset about these bans because they were not getting the stuff they needed for a decent life. And then, as I pointed out, scarcity of various things, and you can see the list here. I'm not going to repeat them. We can come back when we discuss when we have the Q&A. So these factors created a combined crisis, what I call dual crisis. One, economic crisis, as you could see from my introduction, an economic crisis, and also the political crisis. So I'm not going to talk about economic crisis that much. As you know, I'm not an economist. I started as a political scientist. Then I'm teaching conflict resolution, international conflicts mainly. Therefore, I will focus on the political aspect rather than economic aspects because I don't have the expertise to explain. So why is it happening? Why the Sri Lankan people are on street protesting against the government creating this tense situation in the country? Some of the Sri Lankan experts believe this is a fundamental urge for system change in Sri Lanka. People are tired of all these things, so they want to reform and rebuild a new Sri Lankan system that caters to the basic needs of the people. I see it a little bit differently. I see this social tension mainly as a response to scarcity of essential items. So therefore, I always, when I write and also talk about Sri Lankanism, I emphasize the fact that there is a negative correlation between supply of essential item in the market and the agitation. So when the supplies go down, the protests go up. So that's how I see. Therefore, my solution to the Sri Lankan, if I'm jumping the line a little bit, solution to Sri Lankan crisis is, two line of argument. One immediate and one long term. Immediate would be making sure the supplies are ensured, basic needs are met for the people. Then the social tension would come down. Then long-term plan to address Sri Lanka's economic issues, limit the printing of money, get international assistance to repay, maybe restructure the loan repayment structure, etc. We can come back to it. Therefore, my view about the whole tense situation in Sri Lanka is very, very narrow, very limited, and I think I have a realistic view about the situation, rather than some of the scholars who are thinking in terms of holistic ideals like system change, people want to reform, etc. So maybe a little bit debatable. So you can see the queues for various things, gasoline, petrol, medicine, and everybody's on the street. So in response, when the supplies are not adequate, people are having tough time getting these basic demands. They demanded the government to step up. So I would say the protest, the tense situation, the people's response have two different type of objectives. One, in the short term, getting the government out, getting the present ruling party out from the ruling power structure. And then maybe in the long run, a system change where the powers of the presidents could be removed or reduced, and maybe parliamentary system could be introduced where powers would be devolved and diffused. So in terms of actual action, people created street protests. They built a village called Gotha Gogama. Gotha means President Gotha. Go means should go. Gama means town. So the building is sieged and he doesn't come to office as far as I know. And they also built a similar village in front of the Prime Minister's office. Eventually, Prime Minister resigned due to the pressure, and nationwide hartals, strikes, and also the university students surrounded the parliament, that eventually led to the resigning of the Prime Minister, Mr. Mahinda Rajapaksa. So the point I'm trying to make is, although the protesters say they want system change, not really. They immediately want the supplies, and they also want the government to go. Maybe in the long run, system change where the presidential system could be altered completely or partially. So you can see people on the street. Gotha Gogama is there, and people bring their children to the street to protest. So the situation is extreme, as you can see. And as I said, people want the government to go. When they say government to go, the government is actually the Rajapaksa family, right? The Rajapaksa family controls the government. Prime Minister, the president is Gotabaya Rajapaksa, one of the family members. Prime Minister was Mahinda Rajapaksa, one of the family members. Chamal Rajapaksa was one of the ministers. Namal Rajapaksa, one of the sons of the Mahinda Rajapaksa family. Mahinda Rajapaksa. He was a minister. I think he was a sports minister, and there were several other members of the family controlling at the ministerial level, and also the secondary level, like local institutions, etc. Therefore, in Sri Lanka, in the last 2 years, but from 2009, I would say 2009, there is an interval in from 2015 to 2019. Then the Rajapaksa, the structure came back. The government is completely controlled by the Rajapaksa family. Therefore, when people say the government should leave, they basically mean the Rajapaksa family should leave, and also the others, of course. And when people say Gotha go Gama, Gotha should go, Gotabaya Rajapaksa should go, they mean not only stepping down from the proposition, but also leave the country, because he used to be a dual citizen of the United States and Sri Lanka. So he gave up the American citizenship in order to become the president. Therefore, they not only want him to step down, but also leave. And people say they should return all the money allegedly looted from Sri Lanka by the family. Therefore, people are asking that these members should be arrested, investigated, the money taken back, etc. That is one reason why after resigning, Mahinda Rajapaksa still is not in the public sphere, is somewhere in a very safe place. So local people could argue that he is in hiding. He came to Parliament when Parliament convened 2 weeks ago, I think, and people are still debating whether he came by car in an open environment or he was dropped in a helicopter. So the family is under tremendous pressure because people see the family as the fundamental cause of the crisis. Then when Mahinda Rajapaksa resigned on May 9th, there was an attack on the protesters that remained peaceful until that point. And then there was an explosion of violent response against the government, members of the government, their supporters, their properties, and everything. If you believe some of the reports that are coming from Colombo, you can see more than 100 buildings burned, looted, maybe 8 to 10 people were killed, all government supporters, and police officers were attacked. Military officers who were perceived as government supporters came under pressure. Therefore, the protests that remained peaceful until May 9th suddenly exploded, and the country immediately went into a very serious situation. However, with the resigning of Mahinda Rajapaksa, the part of the objective of the protesters was achieved because they said, Gotabaya Rajapaksa should go, Mahinda Rajapaksa should go. So the Mahinda Rajapaksa is gone now. But the president is still in power. They are still continuing the protest against the president, want him to leave. And then Ranil Wickremesinghe, who used to be prime minister, but in the last 2020 August 2020 parliamentary election, his party was completely routed. It's just completely defeated. And the party used to be a governing party, won only 1 seat. That's also from the national list, not direct election seat. And Ranil Wickremesinghe took that national seat in parliament, and with 1 seat in the parliament, he became prime minister. Because the new president decided to ask Ranil Wickremesinghe to form government. So why he was invited to form the government or become the prime minister? There are several factors. One is very good on economic and developmental issues. He has very good international connection. He understands the economic dimensions very, very, very well. And also maybe Ranil Wickremesinghe may be acceptable to some of the protesters. So these are some of the facts that influence the presidential decision to appoint him as the prime minister. He is the prime minister with only 1 seat in parliament. And some Sri Lankan commentators point out it's undemocratic because he has only 1 seat in parliament. I don't believe that. I don't believe that because the governing party will support his premiership, right? Then he has the parliamentary majority. So I don't see that as an undemocratic appointment. But the problem is, as soon as the problem is resolved, if Ranil Wickremesinghe managed to resolve the economic crisis and the government want to get rid of him, they could easily do it with 1 decision because he doesn't have any parliamentary seats. They can vote against him and fire him basically. And in one of my slides, if you see in my last, I call it condomizing Ranil Wickremesinghe, use him and then throw him away. That's what would most probably happen to him. There's also an external dimension to the whole crisis, that is the China connection. China was very involved in the whole crisis and the issue because government was borrowing a lot from China, and China became the most prominent factor in Sri Lanka's foreign policy after 2009. Before 2009, there was a balance between China and India, not leaning too much toward China, although psychologically Mahinda Rajapaksa government is pro-China because there was a fear of India. If you remember 1980s, India used to support the Tamil rebels, right? So if in Sri Lankan government goes towards China too much, leans too much towards China, there was a theoretical position that India could help the Tamil rebels against the Sri Lankan government, and the government did not want that. Therefore, they tried to maintain that balance. But after 2009, war ended, that fear just disappeared. Therefore, Mahinda Rajapaksa was able to go drastically towards China, completely sidelining India. So if I would argue, after 2009, India did not have any influence in Sri Lanka, although Sri Lankan government was saying we will not do anything against Sri Lankan, Indian interest, including Indian security in Sri Lanka. Those I call verbal assurances. Actually, India was completely sidelined. That's my analysis. I may be wrong. Therefore, I would say from 2009, after the war ended, India was completely sidelined because Sri Lanka became a strong China pro-China element, almost like a satellite state. China was giving assistance, financial assistance, loans, building ports, mega projects. Also, there was an international demand to investigate Sri Lanka for war crimes allegedly committed during the last phase of the war. And China defended Sri Lanka in the international arena. Therefore, China and Sri Lanka became very good friends in the post-LTT era. Therefore, China was an important factor in what happened after the end of the war in politics and also economics. But when the crisis exploded, Sri Lanka asked China to restructure. If you see the first bullet point in my PowerPoint, asked China to restructure the loan repayment system. China refused, and also a little slow to help Sri Lanka in order to overcome the situation. And my theory was Sri Lanka and China were negotiating how to resolve this issue, and China was making some unreasonable demands that delayed the Sri Lankan government to get China's help to resolve Sri Lankan situation. Because in March, President came on national TV and said, we will resolve this issue with the help of the IMF. But they were extremely slow in negotiating with IMF, and no move was made to get the IMF help. So my theory is Sri Lanka was negotiating with China while wasting time on IMF, thinking they could resolve this issue with China. That did not happen. And China was also very adamant about the whole situation. And Mahinda Rajapaksa resigned. With Mahinda Rajapaksa gone, China doesn't have a friend in the government, because Gotabaya Rajapaksa, the president, and the current Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe were relatively pro-India than pro-China. Therefore, I would say with the resigning of Mahinda Rajapaksa, China lost, and India is making inroad. India, if you see what happened, India extended a credit line of $1 billion in March 2022, additional assistance, and Tamil Nadu government sent some assistance as well. And India is also supporting Sri Lanka's decision to use IMF to resolve the issue. And this quote I picked up from one of the newspapers yesterday. Prime Minister Narendra Modi went to Chennai to declare open some economic projects, I think. And he said, you can see from the quote, various assistance various projects are extended, and India would support Sri Lanka. What is happening is with the crisis, China lost and India gained. India is coming in, but I'm not saying this is going to be the permanent situation. What that could happen, but anything could happen in the Sri Lankan situation, because the government is extremely predictable situation. One, whether Ranil Wickremesinghe could resolve the economic crisis. He has the potential, as I said. He has good connections. He has good comprehensions of the issue. He knows how to do that. But that is the potential. We don't know whether he could do it. But as I said, my first point, there is a negative correlation between the supply and the protest. If we cannot resolve these basic issues of the Sri Lankan people, then people will protest against Ranil Wickremesinghe as well, maybe force him to resign as well. And president is still under siege. He may be forced to resign as well. So the point I'm saying is, I don't know what happened in Sri Lanka in the near future. Very unpredictable. So I stop here. We'll be happy to answer questions. Dr. Binod.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I was getting some calls. Thank you, Professor I.Keethaponcalan. We have got a very clear and comprehensive view analysis of, from a third angle, from what exactly happened in Sri Lanka. I think the political system right now is at the core of the issues, and people's protests are well justified. As you mentioned rightly, that it was first the supporters of Mahinda Rajapaksa who attacked the people. So this Rajapaksa family, I don't know how well they are connected with the leaders in India and other countries, that till now, we don't see any criticism from outside Sri Lanka on this leadership. Generally, if it happens with Imran Khan or with some Nawaz Sharif family in some other countries, there'll be statement from DC, that this regime or this dispensation is corrupt. It should leave the country and go for new election. Nobody is asking in India or in other countries that Sri Lanka should go for a fresh election, choose a new leadership, and go for a new ministerial. And you concluded that it is unpredictable, which is not acceptable to us, sir. We want Sri Lanka to have a good future, stable future, and political scientists have to play a role in that. And what they have proposed right now, the 21st Amendment, is it something, I wanted to ask you, sir, is it something to do with the presidential power in Sri Lanka? Is the president of Sri Lanka is more powerful than the president of the United States? I mean, how do you see the two political systems? And like, he can just pick a prime minister and throw a prime minister, just in overnight. And other issues, sir, when it comes to India, you mentioned at times that India has either, been sidelined, or China has been sidelined just now, and India has come to the play. Here, allow me one comment as a moderator. I believe when we see the Indian policy in Sri Lanka for the last 4 decades, 5 decades, there has been active, involvement in the 1980s. We got a very bitter lesson in 87, and after that, the assassination of our Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi. Since then, I think India is very consistent. If India is required to help Sri Lanka in any way, whether it's infra or in any way, we are there, whether it's tsunami or any crisis right now. But sir, since after that lesson, India learned bitter lesson of Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi, I don't think we have tried to intervene in Sri Lankan politics in any way. We have been watching, and we have kept a very good distance and relationship with all the political dispensation. So this was a small interference from my side, that India's policy towards Sri Lanka has been very consistent. We treat Sri Lanka as one of the very closest neighbor and brother, and we'll be there with them in any way. I'm nobody to say this, but whether it is BJP government or Congress government or government in Tamil Nadu, I think they're very concerned about what's happening in Sri Lanka, and that's why we are having this session. And your views are very clear and lucid to us, but there are a few points which is, if you can take up in the Q&A session. The one I just mentioned, that how come Rajapaksa family is so well connected with the political dispensation across the world, that there's no criticism of this, his brother, I mean, the whole nepotism you have put in the on the slide. And second thing, sir, don't you think that it's not just true with Sri Lanka? Many of the countries in the world are going through a very severe financial and economic crisis. Some countries have resilience, like India, huge country, a lot of diversified economic aspect. So India can sustain more than any other country. But life of people in Pakistan and Nepal and other small countries is not very happy, sir. It's not very beautiful. So this global politics, the geopolitics of Russian attack in Ukraine, and also before this the COVID-19 crisis, and the way they have increased the inflation and food prices and everything, I think we are at the disposal of this big power politics. So being a small country, Sri Lanka, I know there has been a lot of mismanagement at the government level. There is a huge corruption. We have spent good time in Sri Lanka. We realized that at every level there was corruption, and it's better to work outside Sri Lanka sometime and give some advices than to be inside Sri Lanka. So coming to this Q&A stage, my first question is that what is the role of judiciary in Sri Lanka? We never hear something, there's an oversight from judiciary or how the government money is spent. Or in India, we have a CAG, Comptroller and Auditor General of India. So we try to see how government is spending money or what the deal between Sri Lanka and China. It has to go to parliament and to be passed. So sometimes people are very happy and they have elected the Rajapaksa family with a thumping majority. And now they want them to, get out of Sri Lanka. So people are irrational, people are emotional, people are excited, but who is there to guide the people? Media, judiciary, or the international society? If I'm a Sri Lankan, I'm looking for some different view from the government, whom should I look for? This is my first question, sir. Thank you so much.
Right. Thanks, Dr. Binod. You have some very, very good questions. So let me take some of the questions. One, of course, yes, as you know, Sri Lankan president is constitutionally very powerful, more powerful than the American president. I don't think. I mean, I've been living in the U.S. Last 12 years. I don't think American president is powerful locally. He's powerful internationally. Locally, American president doesn't have that much power. They can't sometimes get even small pieces of legislation enacted because the Senate rules and the Congress is very powerful. Therefore, the point is, the Sri Lankan president is by law very powerful. All sorts of power, dissolve parliament, dismiss governments, change ministers at will. So very, very powerful. So people think that's one of the reasons why the Rajapaksa family was able to exploit the situation and also mess it up, if I can use that word, because they were in power from 2005 with a small interval from 2015 to 2019. So that's one reason why the present government has reintroduced some of the changes that were brought through the 18th Amendment, 19th Amendment, 17th Amendment, and they are introducing the 21st Amendment. I have not seen the draft because it's still under discussion. They have not published anything. But if I assume, they were probably going back to the 18th Amendment and the 19th Amendment, because those amendments to the Constitution reduced the presidential powers. And then Rajapaksa, as you rightly pointed out, won the August 2020 parliamentary election convincingly. Therefore, they were able to reintroduce some of the original provisions of the Constitution, making the president more powerful now. So in fact, I mean, there was a resistance against the presidential powers in Sri Lanka. And because of that resistance, some of the democratic changes that were introduced through 17th Amendment, 19th Amendment, I believe, were reversed, and president became like the original president introduced in 1978, and now I think more powerful. Therefore, my assumption is the 21st amendment that is under discussion right now try to drastically reduce presidential powers, But we have to wait and see, because Rajapaksa family has proved that they can come back. They can come back. They can always come back. So we have to wait and see. But there is a good possibility that the 21st Amendment could be implemented, and President agrees to give up some powers in order to save his position. The second question, I think, is about the international connections. I don't believe Rajapaksa family has a very good international support or backing in the Western world. The United States and Western European states do not like Rajapaksa style of government that much, but they try to work with the government because they realize the Rajapaksa family is very powerful. So in order to get something done, they have to work with that structure. Therefore, they in a way partially accept the Rajapaksa type of style of rule. But there was a process against Sri Lanka in the UNHCR, headed by the United States from 2012. That process demands some democratization and also justice for the minorities. That did not succeed because, as you know, Sri Lanka is a very small country. International attention is not on Sri Lanka. There are other major serious problems. For example, Ukraine war is the focal point right now. Before that, Afghanistan and other issues were capturing the international attention. Sri Lanka never was in the priority. That's one of the reasons why Sri Lanka did not get too much attention. And also, especially European states like to work with the government in order to get the changes they want rather than challenging it, because Rajapaksa family is extremely powerful in terms of the social acceptance, right? So in the last parliamentary election, they won almost 60% of the public approval. If I remember correctly, 59.9%. Something like that.
58 something.
Right. So they're very powerful. So there's no point challenging them. So the European states try to work with them in order to get the changes, democratic changes, good governance. They wanted in Sri Lanka. Judiciary, of course, it's not completely independent. If I compare it with the Indian system, Indian system is more independent. Sri Lankan system is more politicized, I would say. The connection to the protest is who's directing or who's guiding the protesters. So one of the beautiful aspects, in my view, about the current the resistance in Sri Lanka, it doesn't have a leadership. People are reacting to the need. That was the fact that actually brought Mahinda Rajapaksa down. If the resistance is backed by one of the political actors, the government could have easily dealt with that political actor and brought the resistance down. Right now, there's no leadership. People are on the street on their own. They are in front of the presidential secretariat on their own. They are camping out. They are collecting money from various sources and delivering food, water, medical assistance. They also entertain a little bit. It's entirely a kind of a very different truly people's movement, in my view. That's one of the reasons why it's so powerful. In Sri Lanka, as you know, Sri Lanka always have these protests, but always backed by a political actor. So that's one reason why they were not very effective. But this time it was different. And I think as long as it remained apolitical, it has some capacity to bring changes to Sri Lanka.
All right, sir. All right. All the three questions are well answered, sir. I think there's one, Mr. Bizet. There's a law minister, newly appointed law minister, who was also in the old government. He is responsible for 21st Amendment, and he's trying to reduce some presidential power. It's in public debate right now. And you'll be laughing when I say that when I read some Chinese language Global Times newspaper, they will try to come out tomorrow or after some time, after 1 month, with a theory that, India was behind this, protest and everything. Just their politics, they always use this. So you made it very clear that the protests are, anonymous. I mean, they're just emotional and the real life situation. Allow me, sir, to bring Bharati madam. She has been working on Sri Lanka for some good time. She has visited your department and she has met you. I visited Sri Lanka during the Vesak in 2018. I spent there 3 months and met all leaders. So Bharati madam, what is your perspective on the Sri Lankan crisis right now? Please.
Yes, sir. Sir, first of all, I would like to welcome Professor A.K. Pasha. He is the former chairperson of our board of study. And
Welcome, sir. Welcome.
Yes, sir. It's a great, sir, to see you in our forum, sir. And
He's a very senior most professor working on
yes,
India and West Asia.
Yes, sir. And he is the one who is giving a constant support to me to developing our department, sir. And sir, when it comes to the Sri Lanka and issue, though India and Sri Lanka, as I mentioned in the earlier, since Ramayana we have a good relations. We are a good friend, good neighbors, and since after 1980s, after the incidents of Rajiv Gandhi, little India kept away. And do you think this is caused for somewhere uh, to lead the difference between India and Sri Lanka? And how do you feel, sir? Is this crisis what is happening in Sri Lanka? Will this help us to remove or solve the misunderstanding in between India and Sri Lanka? Again, will it help us to create good relations in future? That's one thing. And also, as we know, Sri Lanka blindly believed Chinese, and of course, some extent it is true also. It welcomed China. Do you think what will be the future of that? Do you think Sri Lanka will be able to maintain the same relations with China? And in case if it is maintaining, what will be the future of Sri Lanka and China? This is one thing. And again, sir, when you are talking about the politics, internal politics of Sri Lanka, maybe it is one of the cause for the great economic crisis in Sri Lanka. Do you think, sir, only the power politics, that is family politics, which is it is the only cause for the economic crisis of Sri Lanka, sir?
So those are the two questions. Bharati, is that right?
Hello?
Yes, two questions. Yeah, two questions.
Two questions.
You can take it back.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah. That's
And
last one. Yes, sir.
I think there was three questions.
Okay.
Whether from this crisis India and Sri Lanka relations will go for a very good spring, and whether China and Sri Lanka will be affected. And the last point was whether internal politics itself is responsible for that. Yeah.
Is it the only family politics is cause for this Sri Lanka's great economic crisis, sir?
Okay, I'll come to it. Bharati, I would also like to take some student questions from the students.
Yeah, sure.
So let me answer the Indo. I hear from Dr. Singh and Dr. Bharati that India decided to stay out from Sri Lanka, and they were like hands off, right? Hands off policy. I don't believe. I'm sorry to say I don't believe. During the war, last phase of the war, India said after Rajiv Gandhi assassination, they were not trying to get involved in Sri Lanka. They had a what they call hands-off policy in Sri Lanka. But during the last phase of the war, India extremely helped Sri Lankan government to defeat the LTTE through various means. My 2019 book, it's called Post-War Dilemmas of Sri Lanka, Democracy and Reconciliation, as a first chapter on end of the war, and I describe how India helped Sri Lanka to defeat the LTTE. So that I don't consider as hands off. And also after the end of the war, there is a difference between not interfering in the internal affairs, and making sure India's interests are not adversely affected, right? There's a difference between these two things. So I agree that India desisted from interfering in the internal affairs of Sri Lanka after the end of the Cold War. That doesn't mean they gave up on Sri Lanka, because Sri Lanka is too important for India's security. So they had an interest in Sri Lanka. If what you guys say, we didn't care about Sri Lanka, that was foolish to say from the Indian policy-making perspective, because Sri Lanka is so important to India's security. You cannot do that. You always have an eye on Sri Lanka. And you have to make sure Sri Lanka doesn't do anything that negatively affects India's security. That's one reason why India was concerned about Chinese build-up in Sri Lanka after the end of the war. The case is the Colombo port project, port city project, that building a new land close to India, from where China could threaten in India, right? So therefore, I would not agree with the argument India didn't bother about what is happening in Sri Lanka. So they wanted to make sure that Sri Lanka does not go too close to China, because that has the potential to challenge India's security. My point is, India was not able to do that. So ideally, India would not have the Colombo port project, right, built by India, but built by China. Ideally, that is the case, but they couldn't stop it because China and Sri Lanka became so close. When India supported the Sri Lankan government to defeat the LTTE, they believed after the end of the war, Sri Lanka would be friendly with India. That did not happen. Therefore, I mean, personally, maybe we can disagree. Personally, I do not agree with the argument that India did not bother and India, completely followed a hands-off policy. That is not true. But India lost Sri Lanka. That is the reality. India lost Sri Lanka because Sri Lanka became a very close Chinese ally. That is the reality. But now, as I said, because of the crisis, how China responded to crisis, because Sri Lanka was in crisis and Sri Lanka asked China to help, and Sri Lanka did not get that help. Therefore, China, one of the strongest supporters of China in the ruling structure, Mahinda Rajapaksa, is not in power anymore. That is a setback to China. And if the constitution is changed, Mahinda Rajapaksa family cannot come back, then it would be good for India, because the remaining leaders, whoever it is, Sajith Premadasa or Ranil Wickremesinghe, are relatively pro-India. I would say even Gotabaya Rajapaksa is relatively pro-India. If I remember correctly, as soon as assumed power, Gotabaya Rajapaksa went to Delhi, not China. And Mahinda Rajapaksa several times went to China, if I remember correctly. So this is good for India. The changes that are taking place, because India is also helping, as I put it in my last slide. Prime Minister Narendra Modi said we are extending all sorts of help, and we are ready to help more, because they want to bring Sri Lanka under India's sphere of influence without interfering in the internal affairs. Therefore, what is happening today is good for India. And I think it will be extremely difficult for China to come back and have the same level of influence in Sri Lanka, because of the way they responded to the Sri Lankan crisis in the last 2 months. From a strategic perspective, China should have helped openly, done something in order to help Sri Lanka to overcome the crisis. For example, agreeing to restructure the loan, etc. They didn't do that, so that was a mistake from the Chinese perspective. Therefore, I would say the prospects are good for India when you see from what is happening today. The Rajapaksa family, I think, they are not solely responsible for the crisis, but they are mainly responsible. So if you go back to my second or third slide where I list the causes of the crisis, you see the Rajapaksa family's connection to too many things like corruption, nepotism, and some of the not so smart policies like 100% organic farming, things like that. And Sri Lankan people currently feel that the Rajapaksa family believed that they owned Sri Lanka because they won the war, right? And they actually owned the country. They actually owned the country because they were so popular. They could win the presidential election, parliamentary election thumpingly in 2019 and 2020. Therefore, I would say they were mainly responsible for what is happening in Sri Lanka today. Yeah. Thanks for asking those questions, Bharati. Can we also take some students from the questions from the students?
Yeah.
Karthik, are you there? Can you ask your question? Is a sophomore, I think. Yeah. Hi, Karthik.
Thank you for that informative talk, sir. I am Karthik, a political science student with the University of Mysore. My question is that the Speaker of the Sri Lankan Parliament had warned that there was an existential threat to the parliamentary democracy. This is a view that has been echoed by several South Asian affairs analysts. Even the former National Security Advisor of India, Shiv Shankar Menon, in his recent talk in Asian Society, echoed the same view. He said if there was any chance at all for an authoritarian system to be established in Sri Lanka, are there enough constitutional safeguards to stop that switch? And also, is the political future for Sri Lanka stable without the Rajapakshas? Thank you, sir.
Okay, big question.
Can you rephrase that question, Dr. Singh, please?
Yeah. Karthik, can I? Okay. So the first point is that there was a debate on Asia Society platform with Shiv Shankar Menon and also the earlier head of Sri Lankan Central Bank, Mr. I just forget his name internet. Yeah. So the idea was that what Karthik is suggesting in his question is that maybe Sri Lanka politically, the parliamentary system, as he mentioned, quoted the Speaker of Sri Lanka, is not very stable, and maybe it needs an authoritarian system like Rajapaksa to make it grow faster, like South Korea did earlier or some other countries did earlier. So he is combining his two questions like that. Okay, without Rajapaksa, maybe Sri Lanka will get into chaos, civil warfare, because there will be no powerful leader to control the country and focus on the economy. Right, Karthik?
So that is the second question, right? See, you also asked the first question.
The first question is that if there are enough constitutional safeguards to stop Sri Lanka from switching to an authoritarian system.
Right.
In the backdrop, there are many military figures in the public and private sectors now. Many institutions are headed by military leadership.
Right. I would say in response to the first question, the constitutional safeguards were not very strong because Constitution allows the president to be an authoritarian. He could do various things, make decisions like, organic farming from tomorrow, like a king, right? And then fire the prime minister, fire the other ministers, government officials. They can threaten media, etc. One of the reasons is, relatively Sri Lankan judiciary is not completely independent. Therefore, these constitutional safeguards were not very strong. Why Mahinda Rajapaksa or the Rajapaksa family was able to move towards a stronger or authoritarian type of government was that the Constitution allowed it, right? So I would say, compared to constitutional safeguards, public opinion is more strong. So they were moving towards a completely authoritarian structure, and the people of Sri Lanka said, wait a minute, you can't do it. We want you to go back. So reform the constitution and forced. Actually, it was very impressive given last year's Sri Lanka's political environment. They were able to force the most powerful politician in the country, Mahinda Rajapaksa, to resign. So I would say public opinion was stronger in terms of safeguarding the democratic values of the Sri Lankan system, because Sri Lanka is a pretty vibrant democracy, right? I think compared to any other country in South Asia, Sri Lanka has more elections, all sorts of elections, parliamentary election, presidential election, provincial election, local government election, all sorts of elections, because the democratic ideas are very strong within the political imagination of the people. So in order to answer your question, the first question, I don't think constitutional safeguard is strong. That's one reason why they have to reform. The 21st Amendment could introduce some of the safeguards, reintroduce some of the safeguards that would make democracy a little more stronger in Sri Lanka. And without Rajapaksa, I don't think an authoritarian leader would destabilize the system in Sri Lanka. I don't think that argument should be or could be used to justify an authoritarian system in Sri Lanka. I do not believe that Sri Lanka depends on Rajapaksa family for political stability. That would be an insult to the people of Sri Lanka, who have made some not so smart decisions. For example, in my last article, Dr. Singh, if you have seen, I say the protesters behave as if they are not responsible for any of these things. So they say, you guys are responsible. Mahinda Rajapaksa is responsible. The government is responsible. But they voted this government with 60% public approval in last year, 2020. So if it was a normal majority, it was almost 2/3 majority, right? Sri Lankan parliament has 225 seats. They won about 148 seats. So close to 150 is the 2/3 majority, little lower than 2/3 majority. So powerful mandate. So if they won the election with normal majority, say for example, the normal majority is 130, they won 125 seats. The government is already down now. So why you could not topple this government? Because the victory in 2020 was so strong. So the voters are also partially responsible for what is happening today. So, but they behave as if we have absolutely nothing. You have to do that. So that is, somebody need to point that out. Therefore, I do not agree with the argument you need an authoritarian, not Rajapaksa, but anybody else, in order to provide stability to Sri Lankan system. Sri Lankan system worked very well with not so strong authoritarian type governments. Therefore, I agree with Dr. Singh. In the same argument, I say the best option Sri Lanka has is dissolve both, because people's voice is so strong. Therefore, dissolve both parliament and the presidency and go for new election. In my view, that is the best solution for Sri Lanka. Going for a new mandate, anybody can present any idea to resolve the crisis and establish stability, and people can vote for that entity, whatever it is.
I think the question of this, authoritarian system has come from China, where they're trying to come out with a system that if the system is authoritarian, the economies grow faster. That kind of thinking is coming in political science, and some countries are infected by this virus. Before I give the platform to Alok, we have very senior professor from Jawaharlal University of New Delhi, Professor A.K. Pasha. He would like to make a small comment. Professor Pasha, how are you, sir?
Fine, thank you, Dr. Singh. At the outset, I would like to compliment Dr. Bharati and the Department of International Relations at the University of Mysore for organizing this brilliant lecture, and Dr. Keetha's very comprehensive presentation covering domestic and external factors in the current turmoil which our neighbor is facing. Just one or two comments concerning the domestic factors. We all know that this crisis was in the making for quite some time, partly because of mismanagement and incompetence, and partly because of the manipulation of democratic structures. The Rajapakshas were accused But my point is, Rajpaksha, as Dr. Keetha pointed out, came to power through very legitimate means. There was no rigging or unconstitutional methods. But I think the social structure was fractured after the bomb blast and the nationalist agenda failed to take off. Being a student of the Arab world, I'm reminded of the Arab Spring, where masses came out in large numbers in Egypt, in Tunisia, Libya, Sudan, Syria, so on and so forth. So it's something like an Arab Spring, which has broken out in South Asia, starting with Sri Lanka. But I think it was the COVID situation which aggravated. My question, 2 points. One is, does this crisis, despite Dr. Keetha's brilliant expose, I'm worried about the internal political stability, and that brings me to the issue of authoritarian or the system which has been talked about. What are the prospects or likelihood of military intervention in Sri Lanka if the political leaders are unable to resolve the challenges posed by the economic problems of huge magnitude? Although the level of political culture and the legitimacy issues of the government are there, but I fear that if they are unable to solve the gigantic economic problems, the military may intervene. Secondly, what role has the United States played in this entire crisis, whether it is in the IMF or its long-standing demand for air and naval facilities in view of the Indo-Pacific policy, which they have been vigorously pursuing? Lastly, although India is extremely concerned about the situation, but what more India can do, given the nature of political leaders who are either completely pro-India or pro-China, not pro-Sri Lanka as they ought to have been? Can change of the political system solve its basic issue, and the deafening silence of the Sri Lankan press, which used to be very vibrant at one stage? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for those very thought-provoking questions. There was in terms of the first question on the military, there was a fear that Sri Lanka could move into a military type of governance after the crisis, because people perceive President Gotabaya Rajapaksa as like a militaristic person, because he also came from military background. He was the military officer before he left the country, and he was instrumental in defeating the LTTE in 2029. So people thought he would move more towards military rule, but that didn't happen. Although military was introduced and they were on the street trying to take control, because the public of anger and the response was so strong, he couldn't immediately do it. He knows that if he move into military type intervention, there would be bloodbath. There will be serious forms of violence within the Sinhala community, in between the military and the people, because people were already attacking police and the military when the resistance was theoretically peaceful. That's one reason that kind of discouraged him going into that kind of rule. And some of the changes that are coming in right now are encouraging. For example, Savendra Silva, who was the army chief, was responsible for some of the areas in the LTT controlled areas during the war, and also took credit for ending the war and defeating the LTT. Was a very powerful man, and they had good chemistry between the president and the military chief, Savendra Silva. Therefore, if military is to intervene, it doesn't doesn't have to stage a coup like in Pakistan to taking over, because you already have a friend in the government, right? The president is himself as a semi kind of military person. So that person is as a step down now. Savendra Silva is stepping down as army chief and going into like CDS as like a chief of defense staff or something like that. So it's a ceremonial position. He's still in the military structure, but he won't be the military army chief. So that's also a good sign. Therefore, because of the ferocity of the resistance, the government or Gotabaya Rajapaksa was not able to introduce a military into the picture and take control. That's one reason why he appointed Ranil Wickremesinghe, a political foe, right? From other party, it isn't like Ranil Wickremesinghe still appointed him. Therefore, the indications are good. Sri Lanka is moving a little bit away from the possibility of military intervention, but I wouldn't say it's 100%. The threat is still there. If Ranil Wickremesinghe fails and if the social chaos continues, military can still come into the picture. So I would say it's encouraging, but not completely disappeared. That's for the first question. Second question, US is disappointing. American response was disappointing during the crisis and also a little before that. That's one reason is that the Sri Lanka chose to go completely with China, right, during that period. As I mentioned, the UNHCR process where they were trying to, introduce some accountability to what happened during the last phase of the war, and there were a series of resolutions against Sri Lanka, and they were asking for international intervention, investigation, and the process was led by the US. The US was doing that process, the UNHCR process, in order to take control of the Sri Lankan situation, because Sri Lanka has completely slipped away. So they were doing something, but not strong enough because of the Chinese connection and the Chinese backup. If you remember, I don't know if you remember, during the last phase of the war, there was a resolution in the Security Council against Sri Lanka to undertake some sort of intervention, and Russia and China defended Sri Lanka. So that level of international backing from China. So, but as I said in my presentation, Chinese position has weakened right now. So that creates a space for several democratically oriented actors to come in. So I mentioned India's inroad, and other actors, because you raised this really good question. Other actors who could come in and who are trying to come in and slowly coming in are the US and Japan. Japan, before 2009, Japan was the most prominent donor to Sri Lanka. That changed in 2009. China became the most prominent the funder. So Japan also, used to be an influential actor in Sri Lanka, lost. If you remember Dr. Singh, the East Terminal project, China and India were trying to do together, was cancelled by the Sri Lankan government. That's also, I would argue, another example of Indian sidelining in Sri Lanka. And my theory is that project was cancelled because of the Chinese pressure, because China didn't like that. So Japan also lost. So Japanese government is also trying to come in, and these are the democratic actors, right? So they would try to help. And in relation to the last question, and also touch upon other actors like Japan and the US, is to help Sri Lanka to overcome this economic crisis first, right? Economically make Sri Lanka viable, and then focus on the political reformation on the long run. And I've been insisting that the present government means Mahinda Rajapaksa, Prime Minister, and Gotabaya Rajapaksa, the President, did not have the capacity to resolve the crisis. Therefore, I was arguing for a new election, both for the presidency and parliament. I still believe in it. But at least half the problem is resolved, right? Mahinda Rajapaksa is gone. There's a new actor coming in who's a little more democratically oriented and also a little more development oriented compared to Mahinda Rajapaksa and his group. And what Sri Lanka needs right now is to introduce a new scheme with the help of the international actors, including IMF, World Bank, and powerful actors like the US and also India. India is to help Sri Lanka to come out of the economic crisis first. When the economic crisis is resolved, we will have social peace. That tense, that agitation and the tense situation will disappear. Then we can focus on serious long-term constitutional reform to make Sri Lanka more democratic in terms of constitutional new constitution. Yeah.
Thank you so much, sir. I have to take care of time also. So I have two more students lined up. If you allow me, I can ask them to ask.
Yeah, please.
It's a huge topic for them. Alok, are you there? Mr. Alok, can you put your question to speaker directly?
Yes, sir. Good afternoon, sir. Sir, my name is Alok, and I'm second year student in IR department, University of Mysore. At first, sir, thank you for enlightening us with your immense knowledge. Sir, I have a question. My question is, what is the role of Chinese BRI in creating Sri Lanka's economic crisis?
I think the part of the issue is created by Chinese way of functioning in Sri Lanka, because too much money was pumped into unviable projects like Mattala International Airport and the Hambantota Harbour project. Hambantota Harbour project, Sri Lanka could not repay the money. Therefore, there was an agreement between China and Sri Lanka where Sri Lanka leased the Hambantota Harbour and some of the surrounding areas to China for 99 years. Since Sri Lanka was not making any profit from these mega projects, they could not repay. When the crisis exploded, Sri Lanka asked China to help restructure the payment, right? Because Sri Lanka did not have the capacity to repay and say, okay, let's restructure. And China also refused. That's one of the reasons for the explosion of the situation. Therefore, I would say part of the issue was created by the Chinese way of functioning in Sri Lanka.
All right. Thank you very much, sir. Next is Birbhadra, Mr. Birbhadra. And I asked the students, they can finish their questions so that sir can, answer at one time. So Birbhadra, if you are there, can you ask your question?
Good evening, sir. I am Birbhadra, studying in pursuing international relations in Maharaja's College, University of Mysore. Sir, as Sri Lanka is a democratically elected country with democratic principles, the crisis in Sri Lanka would also affect the subcontinent countries. So my question is, how is UN and its bodies taking effective steps to mitigate the crisis in the Sri Lanka?
Well, right now there is a new government, a new prime minister. He is creating his own cabinet of ministers. Therefore, I could safely say there is a new government. But that depends on the ruling Sri Lanka Bodhijana Paramuna belonging to Mahinda Rajapaksa and Gotabaya Rajapaksa. So they are dependent on those parties. So I don't know how much they can achieve without a pure, solid parliamentary majority. But there are moves to reform the constitution, right? As Dr. Singh rightly pointed out, a new constitutional amendment is under discussion, 21st Amendment. If that is, adopted, it will reform the system. Therefore, the system is slowly moving towards better governance system, and maybe a good governance in a very loose sense. Therefore, in the short run, I think Sri Lanka is moving okay, given what happened like last month. So situation has gone down a little bit. I don't see too much social agitation right now because people expect Ranil Wickremesinghe to achieve something.
But sir, if you notice, it has more psychological impact on other countries in South Asia. Maybe who next? Where even in India, some opposition parties are saying we may have similar problems. Opposition leaders. So allow me the last question. Devika, are you there?
Thank you for sharing knowledge, sir. My name is Devika Janartha. I'm currently pursuing my master's in international relations. And my question to you, sir, is the crisis allowing India to further its geopolitical interest by increasing its presence in strategically important places in Sri Lanka? Thank you.
Absolutely.
Very sharp.
Absolutely.
Harshvardhan next. Harshvardhan, please.
Maharaja College from IR department in University of Mysore. Sir, my question is, in the ongoing crisis, what are the expectations of Sri Lanka from India?
Okay, yeah, this question came up here. Should I repeat, sir? His question is,
Yeah, please.
what are the expectations from India, basically, as a common Sri Lankan,
Yeah, in terms of the crisis, India is trying to help Sri Lanka. As I put it in my last slide, Prime Minister Narendra Modi says, we are extending help, and also we are willing to help Sri Lanka overcome the crisis. In return, India would expect Sri Lanka to, reduce its dependency on China and work with South Asian states, become part of the true South Asian community, and also help India's regional and global ambitions.
All right, sir, this is 1.5 hour virtual discussion, and it is compelling us to get you in physical in our campus. Whenever you're traveling to South Asia, to Sri Lanka, you may directly land in Bangalore and then you go to your hometown. You will be safer in India. You'll have plenty of supplies. And before I close this session today, we're really very thankful that we got a very holistic view about political, domestic, and external situations in Sri Lanka. And we hope that situation may be under control if the kind of suggestions you are giving or some other political scientists are giving is taken seriously by Sri Lankan politicians. Because after all, they are in the power. We can only talk here. They have to take the call. And the sooner they take, the better, So I'm not sure, sir, who is advising the current president right now. But I think they should invite advisors from across the world and take the Sri Lankan people to a better future. They deserve it, sir. Sri Lankan people deserve better. I always believe so. They are peace-loving people. They have a very beautiful island, and they have a very good link with the world. They speak very good English. They all are well educated. So the overall profile of Sri Lankan country is very positive. And it was one of the brightest stars in 60s and 70s we used to study. But after globalization, Sri Lanka has lost something in this globalization. Bharati madam, if you allow me, we have a traditional way to say thanks from Saheli, and then Bharati madam will do the closing. So sir, you can take rest now, but allow us to say thank you, express our gratitude for your scholarship, for your early morning coffee. We owe you a good coffee. And your family is most welcome to India, Mysore and Delhi and different part of India. We share same culture, sir. Thank you so much. Saheli, please do the needful on behalf of my institute and Uni of Mysore. It's very important. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. A very good evening to all. It's my pleasure to propose the vote of thanks on behalf of Mysore Global Forum. First and foremost, I thank Professor G. Hemant Kumar Sir, Vice Chancellor of University of Mysore, and Professor Anita Bimla Braggs Ma'am, Principal of Maharaja College, for their constant support and guidance. I take immense pleasure in extending my sincere thanks to our speaker, Dr. I.Keethaponcalan, Professor of Conflict Resolution in Salisbury University, who, despite of his busy schedule, has found time to grace this event. We are really delighted to have you, sir. Thank you so much for joining us. A special thanks to Dr. Binod Singh, sir, Director of BRICS Institute India, for his constant support and guidance. I also must give my gratitude to Dr. Bharati Hiremath, Head and Coordinator of International Relations Department, for giving us this opportunity. A special thanks to Dr. S. Chandanaika, sir, Coordinator of IOE, for helping us in many ways. Last but not the least, I would like to thank the teaching faculty of our department, dignitaries, scholars, and students who have joined us for this event, and also those who worked behind the screen, scholars and students of International Relations Department, for making this event a successful one. Before ending, I'm glad to announce that we have another panel discussion next week on the topic of economic and political crisis in Sri Lanka and India's role. I hope, sir, you will join us that day also. And once again, thank you all of you for your attention. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Saheli. We have Indian High Commissioner Ashok sharing his views next week. So I don't think, sir, we'll bother you so early, but we can adjust our timing sometime. So Bharati Madam, we start the closing session now. Thank you so much.
For joining us and making the day, today's discussion as in very important and as in a brightful, because we had a discussion on various issues. Especially, I am the one who is believing in optimistic relations in an optimistic way. I hope it leads, to the good relations between India and Sri Lanka. Again, we will come back to like ancient period, what we had in our relations, like Ramayana and all. I'm firmly believing in that. I hope, hopefully, it will improve the good relations between India and Sri Lanka, and we will see many more agreements, many more better relations in future, sir, so that we can avoid the external powers in South Asia. Thank you, sir, once again for joining us. Thank you, Dr. Binod, making our discussion very powerful, and also very thankful to Professor Pasha to join us and making our discussion even more meaningful. Thank you, sir. And sir, Professor I.Keethaponcalan, it is a formal invite to you, sir. Please come to Mysore whenever you are going to Sri Lanka. On the way, you can visit our, Mysore, sir. It's close to your Sri Lanka. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting.
And for my students, please go to Eurasian Review and read some of the articles, very scientific writing on political science. So it's not IR, it's political science, remember. So, and read it, and then you can write to sir your opinion and feedback. So sir, from India, it's whatever say, Vanikam, whatever. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you for your time, sir. We appreciate it.